Afternoon, everyone. So in this video, we're going to talk about getting better, and we're going to talk about specifically practice. Now, practice is pretty broad because practice is basically the thing you have to do to get better and progress forward. And I'm going to do a little bit of topics specifically to different types of practice, and I'll have a slide with like some one-word things that kind of give me ideas, but I might think of new things as we continue on. And so, some words that come into mind when I think about practice. Is quantity, quality, solo practice, early game practice, specific like crisis practice, learning the cards, reviewing your games, and just natural progression. And so I think one thing to kind of step back and say is everyone is at a different point in life and have different responsibilities or free time or just motivation. And so you're going to have to cater this to what you are like and how you best learn. And also I want to kind of say that just because you can't play, that's when we talk about quantity. So let's just jump in. Let's just jump in and say, all right, quantity. So the quantity of games you play is a type of practice. I don't think quantity is necessarily the number one indicator of skill or getting better. I think there are a lot of good players who play a lot of games. I think you see Magic Nick plays a lot of games. Joe Manji plays a lot of games. Deaton plays a pretty good amount of games in LFG if you look there. And I'm sure there's other good players that play a lot. Johnny Pastrani plays a lot of games. I know that. And that's good. I think that is a foundation is you have to at least play some games, right? You're not going to get better at this game playing one game a month against some random person or your friend in your friend's basement. And that's all you play. It's just not going to happen. But I also don't think you need to play 10 games a week, like it seems like some people do, to get better. And I also don't think necessarily that... I'll never say playing games is bad. I'm not going to rip anyone and say you're playing too much. But I will say that I think they're not diminishing returns, but at some point I know Curtis. I talked to Curtis a lot. He's probably one of the best players out there right now. And I know for a fact he doesn't play like 20 games a week or anything like that. He plays a couple here, I want to say 2 or 3 a week, maybe less, depending on the tournaments and stuff like that. And depending on what's coming out. But he does do some of these other things that help him make up for quantity if you say he's lacking there. I'm in the realm of like 2 to 3 games a week. I played 5 games this weekend. So we talked about in my last video maybe some of my own personal weakness of anxiety, looking for group anxiety, whatever. I didn't feel like looking for group, but I did 3 games. I did 5 games this weekend, 2 tournaments and 3 looking for games, just random people. And it went well. I can't complain. I got to play 5 convocation games. 1 was on stream that Chewy did for the top cuts, and they all went well. I did win every one of them. Of course, some nice things have happened to help me win it, but it's just good to get the game. I feel good. Like it's almost like the burden of feeling like I haven't played enough was lifted. And so for this week, I have my cuts game. I have a lunch meet game. I might get a looking for game in with somewhere. But anyway, quantity for me is like 2 to 3 a week, depending. And I think that's a good pace. I think that's not, I wouldn't say a minimum, but I think you need to at least be playing once a week to keep up and really progress. Quality games is another thing. So it's kind of like, if you can't do a ton of games, then I would say make the games you play against quality opponents. So, and this is not to say, I'm not bashing anyone who's newer to the game or who's not as experienced or what like that. I've had some very enjoyable games. But if your goal is to improve at this game and really get better and take it up to the next level, you are better off losing to good players and playing them once a week or twice a week than playing 10 games versus people who have no idea what they're doing. And I'm not saying that the community is that divided or anything, but it's an extreme example just because they're not going to be doing things you can really learn from, right? If you're just playing a game and they don't step on secures and they don't, protect themselves well and they just come into your range and you blast them off the board and they're not in range for sacrifice and all this other bullshit, then what does that help you? The only thing that I think just spamming quantity is best at is when you're learning a new affiliation and new models, where a lot of the thinking is going to be on your side. Like, sure, your opponent, if he does stupid things, you'll probably win and it doesn't help you fully. But if you're still trying to get a sense of like your ranges and, I need to make sure that, I'll use convocation example just because that's what I like. I need to make sure that Wong is within 3 of Strange so I can get his plus defense and so I can heal or give power without having to move and take another action. Like, those are things that are kind of like your own sort of solitaire type thing you can work on. And so where enemy skill isn't going to be a huge like detriment if they're not that good. And in fact, I'll say this. If you're just starting out on affiliation, it can be a little crappy to go into somebody who's like super good and super tuned up with their list, because it just like they could just body you, right? And you might not even get to the point where you're like, you might catch a couple mistakes, but you don't really get to get a feel for your list. And so I think if you're starting affiliation, quantity and just getting games, just getting reps, because as much as reading cards is nice and reading cards is important and kind of thinking about things, there's a lot of Discord chatter. Again, I'm not really in the fan servers and stuff, but I see things. There's a lot of chatter about tactics and stuff. And honestly, until you play the game and really get a feel for it, it's hard to know if you're right or wrong. Things like, are cards worth it? I think joint effort was one I was talking to Curtis about. Joint effort got ruled that it works for every enemy, every attack. So like a beam with a bunch of people gets a lot of dice. Great. And then the question, it just looks like, oh my God, then it's 3 power. Then it's, can you get people close enough to the enemy to actually make it worth it? What situations does it occur in? Like, it's easy to draw up some diagram and say, wow, look at this. I'm getting 2 10 dice beams that hits 3 people each. And then the opposite is like, well, how did you get to that situation? Like, did the enemy do something stupid? And this is why the whole, quality comes into play. In fact, bad practice can lead to very bad assumptions. Something can be good because the enemy didn't play around it properly. And that's something that's always interesting when you're playing to kind of think about is, even myself, like, even if the enemy doesn't take advantage of something, you have to think, could he have done something that would have messed me up a little bit more? And then, how can I fix that? How could I have done it different? Sometimes you get bailed out by a misplay, or maybe just something was misspotted. It happens on both sides. There's a lot of things going on in MCP, especially with like pushes and like bumps and different leaderships and whatnot. So it's easy to like miss something. And I'm not saying like, I'll give you an example, a real one. I was playing a game, and I won't go too detailed so the person doesn't know, but basically I had 1 activation left and they had 2. They could have like basically done a passing activation with somebody across the board. I would have had to go, and then he could have walked on the point. What he did was he walked on the point, I threw him off with my character, and then the game was over. I won because I did that, because the other character didn't matter. He didn't realize he had the character over there. It was the end of the game. And I saw it. I saw it during it. And when he moved his guy, I was like, I guess I'm going to win this. And I wasn't 100% lost if he did the other thing, but it would have kept going. The point being is that stuck with me. And I won the game, and sure, it felt good, whatever. But it kind of sticks with you like, oh shit, what could I have done better? Could I have prevented that situation? That's a lot of in-game stuff. So definitely being aware of that is really important. And so I think a nice healthy mix of quantity and quality. And sure, I go out for LFG games, and I'll play whoever comes in front of me, whether they're good or bad. As long as you're chill and nice and don't like bitch a bunch, I'm happy to play you. But there is times where I'm like, all right, I need to get a quality game in, and I want to test it, on a really limit test it. And I think that's something that I'm working towards getting better at. Or I think that's a really big step to really take it to the next level is the focus practice. Especially if you're a person that only gets 1 or 2 games a week, you should look into making friends with good players, talking to them and everything, and then also being like, hey, would you practice this with me? Solo practice. So this is something that I know Curtis does. He plays against himself on TTS. Like full games, or at least like the first couple turns. But let's like full legit like stuff. I haven't done it yet. I don't know how I would like it. I think I've considered it with other games. I do think, and I was talking to Curtis about this, like, you can't really trick yourself, right, in MCP, but the nature of it being back and forth activation and like there really isn't like a lot of things to like trick people on. Like there's nothing's hidden. You really can get kind of a flow for the game. Like there's times when I'm playing a game, I can be like, oh, this is what I would do if I was my opponent. And so I do think there's value in that, in maybe just practicing setups and seeing like, because a lot of turn 0 and 1 can be kind of scripted, and you can see like, oh, I don't like how that feels, or I like, I think he played Cosmic Ghost Rider against himself a lot and like got blown off the board. I think it's worth a try if you're into that and you really want to take it to that level. Again, that kind of makes up for some of the quantity. If you can get reps against yourself to get some of the model positioning down early, I think it can really help. Again, I haven't done it. It probably works better than it does in my head because I've thought about doing it for past games I've played. But like for Malifaux, it doesn't work because like a lot of the scenarios were half the scenarios were hidden. There's just little, like, you don't know, the cards especially, what card your enemy has. And like I said, in MCP, there's really nothing hidden. And there's not a ton of, like, tricks or something or to miss. And because it is back and forth, you can even go as far as, like, when people play chess against themselves, but they do it, like, in, like, pauses, right? Like, they move, and then they move against themselves. And they're constantly, it's more about like the situational awareness of the game and not like which side they want to win necessarily. So I think it's a pretty good idea, and I wish I could do it more. What I do is I don't really play against myself, but sometimes I'll put out my models and I'll, see where things can reach. If you have an idea to like block a certain, can I block some, secures and stuff with certain model movements? Is there enough move to do something cool? That kind of stuff is pretty good to do, Some of it just becomes ingrained in your mind, like, okay, I actually don't know if this is true. This is true. A medium mover cannot get from one B to the other without help, like left to right. So that's good to know, generally speaking, so for rotating that it either works or it doesn't. So that's something to kind of keep in mind, too, and kind of get a sense for as you practice. Early game, again, you can practice your early game, like your deployments. I think it's a really big spot where you can mess up. You can practice picking crews, too, with different crisis values. That also helps. But really thinking about deployment, like looking at the board and saying, all right, here's where the extracts and secures are. Do I have enough models in the right position to not only do what I want to do, but threaten my enemy if they do something poor? Could be as simple as you're on a B map and the enemy only puts one kind of weak model on one side with the Bs, and you make sure that your medium base mover is directly across from them and they can get there in 2 moves and contest it. Or you steal their B if it's or their F extract. And that's something you can get killed on because you might be like, oh, they're not going to come across the board and steal my F, and you deploy something in some way, and you realize that, oh, if they go steal it, there's only like one model I have that can make it to it, and one attack isn't going to be enough. And I think that is probably not done enough in this game, to be completely honest with you. I think you can, because the game has a natural rubber banding with power, and we're getting attacked and getting power is very beneficial, I just feel like there could be way more going across the board and trying to steal something, forcing them to attack you to give you power and to try to get it off of you. You're also like using their activations, and depending on like if you know what the enemy wants to do, and if there's enough crises and extracts and secures that like sometimes moving and shooting is like a double-edged sword. Where it's like, oh, I'm going to hit that guy and do some damage, but I'm not going to make it to the next tract, or I'm not going to make it to the secure I need to. So I'm further falling behind because I'm attacking him now, and I'm not getting to where I need to get to. And so sometimes when I deploy, for better or for worse, I try to be really like conscious of like, I want to be able to get to my secures in one move if possible. And so I'll like deploy them on the side. And sometimes that's dumb because you want to be able to pivot direct depending on what your enemy does. Sometimes it's smart because it means if the enemy does make a mistake or tries to grab something, I can do both, get on the secure and attack them. But you can practice your early game, so you can get used to that. Like you have Lizard and you're like, okay, I'm going to put him across from this B instead of directly in the middle because I want to at least threaten that if I have last activation or even second to last, depending on the order, I'm going to go over there and contest it. And if they don't, right, and sometimes these plans never happen, but the fact that you set it up forced them to do something and you gave yourself a chance for them to mess up. So I think that's like some early game practice. Specific practice. So what I mean by this is I think there's levels to it. I think the first level is, I need to get better at the Sam matchup. So I go to Deaton and I say, hey, Deaton, will you play me? I need practice against Sam. Or I go to Curtis and practice against Hellfire. So that's one. But I also think you can go a little deeper. And I think that it due to the nature of Marvel, right, when you just play somebody random, you do your extracts and stuff, and you do the normal priority and stuff. But you hear about this, like, if I win priority, oh my God. I think priority doesn't matter until it matters. It was, I think some Dean told me. And because I had, like, tracked my stats, and I, won priority, 33% of the time or something in, 50 games. But I wasn't using it to complain. I was just like, to me, I think priority is the biggest overreaction in the game. One of them. I'm not saying it doesn't matter. I'm not saying it doesn't have moments where you're like, fuck, they got the mid extract and maybe it plays out in a certain way. I'm definitely not saying that because it can be really obnoxious. But the drama around rolling priority, I feel is overblown. Now, maybe I've just kind of conditioned myself to not care enough about it and just play, and then maybe I can look back and be like, man, if I would have won priority and been able to steal the mid one, blah, 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 it would have been a lot easier. And maybe sometimes I've won priority and I didn't realize how much it helped me. But I think getting into the mindset that, you can't win if you lose priority or blah, 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 blah is really bad. Just, focusing on dice rolls too much. But that's another thing. But what I mean by specific practice is sometimes people tech things in their list for very specific. The easy one is Dynamo on ease. A lot of people tech Dynamo on ease, and myself included. But, right, people talk about researcher, what's your researcher 15 plan? What's all your other plans? And sometimes it just never comes up because either you win priority and you take your extracts if they have researcher, or you get to pick the points, or blah, 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 blah. For some reason it doesn't come up. And you never really get to test your tech, essentially. And so I do think if you get a good, solid group of guys who know how to play different things and are willing to help and really grind, this is kind of like a WTC thing in the future if I go and I create a team, I would do, is say, hey, listen, I'd love to play my convocation versus your Malekith list. We're going to pretend you win priority and you picked extracts and got researcher. Right? So that is what I would do is I'd practice something that's possible, right? If you're playing Sam that never runs researcher and you don't have it yourself, you don't really need to practice researcher against Sam, right? Now, you never know what people will do, and I think crisis selection and there's a lot of thoughts I have there that isn't made for this video. But I do think there are times where hey, I want to play this list and I want to play in the worst possible scenario for me, which is you get priority and these are the extracts and crisis secures that come up, and then let's roll and see and then I'll pick the points and we'll see what happens, right? Because there's something to be said there, and again, more of a crisis specific video where there's only so many, only so many combinations that can happen in a game, and whether you get to pick the points or not, that you can actually plan for some of them. If you don't have a 15 in your secures, and you're always going to pick your extracts if they have researcher, then you can make the claim that you'll never play 15 researcher, right? Because you'll say, I'm never going to give the chance for researcher if it comes up, and if researcher does come up, it means they had priority, which means we got one of my secures, and none of my secures have 15. You could make that claim. I'm not saying it's always perfect, but you could make that claim and it would happen. But anyway, I think practicing specific things is super important. Cards, again, this is something to do, depending on if you work at a computer or whatnot. But I just think browsing cards and reading them, keeping it, I think this is more important than you give credit for. I think it's always important to know your cards. What are your stats? What are your defenses? What are your attack ranges? Blah, blah, blah. What do triggers before and after damage? I'm sure it's all important. You're not going to remember everything. And this is not a malice on... I'm not putting malice on opponents. But if there's something I've learned in my gaming career of playing all these different games to high levels, it's that at the end of the day, people, including yourself, will probably misplay stuff. Unintentionally, maybe intentionally. And you, as a player, can prevent it by knowing everything. That's it. If you know every card and every rule, then no one can cheat you. Unless they move things too far. No one can cheat you on rules where they say, oh, I have a 3 defense, and you're like, oh no, it's 2. Sure, it's on their card, and it's right in front of you, and you should be able to check it, right? But there are little things things you might just not check, or power stuff. And I think in games, it's really good to keep aware of how much power is on your enemy and how much they should have. Myself included. Sometimes I put too much power because I do it instead of damage or something like that. And you really, again, I think it's unintentional, but you really got to be on it and catch those situations, because there's times where shouldn't you have 0 power? I'll be honest with you. I played a game on TTS, and I threw with Bill thinking it cost 2 because I guess I had Hulk on my mind. I didn't catch it till after the game. I didn't say anything because it was turn 2, and I was like, all right, I can't do anything about it. But it kind of is that sucks that I did that. It also sucks that, if he would have remembered it cost 3, we would have both been... You know what I mean? You can prevent your enemy from making mistakes by knowing things. So I think reviewing cards in your free time and seeing, read some Discord, see what's popping, what's maybe a popular pick or upcoming. I've had to read OG Carol 10 times because Curtis keeps talking about her to me. So I've read her, and now I kind of get what she does. Reviewing your games is a really good tool. I'm not saying you have to review every game, but I will tell you that if you play 100 games and never think twice about what you did, then you're not going to get better. I played, I don't know, I had 2 weeks where I played 50 chess games, and guess what? I didn't get much better because I just played and went to the next game when I lost, right? And so I think that's why quantity is a great thing to have if you have other qualities to back it up. They say, I fear the man who I don't fear the man who practiced 10,000 different punches, but the man who practiced one punch 10,000 times. Whatever that crap is. And that is true, assuming that the person knows how to throw a punch. If they just throw their hand forward and do nothing good, then it doesn't matter that they threw it 10,000 times. And that's true here. You need good practice. You need to be very conscious of what you're doing to get better, or else you're never going to progress. So reviewing your games... I talked to Vodka Blitz, another great player. And as you can see, one trend I have here is I actually talk and message a lot of really strong players. And this was before I was even... I'm putting myself air quotes, considered an upper player. But, before I had made a name in playing in the TTS League in the finals or whatnot, right? This is when I first started MCP. I played a couple games, got into events. I think I played Deedon in the Looking For game. I didn't know who he was. Talked to him after the game, and then I played him again, and really nice guy, and then I just started messaging him. He might tell you I harass him too much, I don't know. But the point being is, without being super harassy, Curtis, I talk to Curtis every day about MCP, because he works from home, I work from home, we have some messages. It started just randomly talking while we were watching some game, and I knew he was a good player, and I played him, and then we talked some more, and it's just nice to have, I talk to Johnny all the time, and I just throw ideas off of him. It's just nice, and sometimes we don't agree, and sometimes we do, but, if I'm learning a new faction or going against something, sometimes I try to find somebody good at it, and I pick their brain a little bit. Again, I don't send them 10,000 messages and harass them about every little thing, but sometimes... I go, hey, why do you like this model? Why do you like this matchup? What do you think of this crisis? Why do you like it? Because if you kind of get... It's not about... I'm not trying to fight the person to get my opinion. I think if you ask the person why they do something, most people are very willing to like tell you their thought process. And then you can decide if you think it's a good or bad, or you can be like, oh, that kind of makes sense. And then you can work your way to plan around it potentially. And so, again, back to reviewing games, I think Vodka told me that every time he plays a game, he makes a note of one thing he could do better. Even if it's as simple as, I should have deployed my medium-based medium mover across from a B so that I could threaten it. That's just something like, you just notice it and you say, I should have did this better. Maybe it wouldn't have won you the game, but it's something that you noticed you could have did better. A lot of little things with like remembering sacrifice ranges or fall, oh, I could have blocked this secure by putting my base in a specific way, stuff like that. And some of it is really hard to think about. Like, your brain can only process so much, and this is why practicing and playing is important. Eventually, it needs to become second nature. Eventually, making sure your models are in range of heroes to hire, making sure that if you're going to heroes to hire, that your models are going to have 2 power at the time it happens. And so sometimes you're like, oh, I need to attack here, or I don't want to spend this superpower because I need the power to brace later, stuff like that. Some of it just becomes natural after you play more games, and then you can make room for the upper level stuff. When you're first playing an affiliation, like, you're gonna forget like little ranges and little things. That's fine. You got to get that base down before you can move on to being like super tactical things. So from a convocation example, as of right now, I never flip the leadership. I just don't. The bump side is better probably, and I guarantee you there are better, and there'll be another discussion I have about convocation. I'm guarantee you there are times where flipping that leadership is good. I know there are times where it's going to be good. But I'm just not at the point now where I think I need to rack my brain around that. I don't know enough about the rest of the stuff to know when I should flip the leadership, for example. And so that's just an example of, the progression of getting better is there's going to be a lot of stuff you don't know, and as you get better and better and better. And that's why I like personally doing reps on the same roster. I know some people play enough games they can play a bunch of different shit and get a feel for everything. I do feel like I'd rather play my own list a bunch of times and kind of iterate on it and make it what I want. But if you play, a ton of games, you're going to get bored eventually, so switching is not so bad. But again, it really is about reviewing and getting better. If you spend all your games being like, oh, my dice sucked, I just rolled bad, blah, 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 there's no hope for you. You really got to ignore dice rolls. I should have put it here. You need to play the game. Spikes happen, man. It's not even, the word spike is, I think the word spike has a connotation of like super unlikely. Spikes, at least the spikes that a lot of people talk about, are just like 20, 10, 5%ers. Like, that's not unlikely, guys. Like, this is not rolling 8 dice and rolling 8 crits. Like, that's insane. That would be insane. It would only be insane if you actually needed 8 crits. Like, oh my god, I one-shot Hulk because I rolled 8 crits into, bullshit like that. Like, if you roll, and this is why if somebody rolls a Helios of 30 dice and it kills a 5 health model, no one really thinks about it. They're like, oh, they put a lot of dice into it. That's a horrible example. The point is, spikes happen. They're not even that unlikely. You just need to get over it and not think about it, because they happen both ways. And if you don't throw dice, you can't spike. But if you let that be they just happen. They just happen. So deal with it and think about things you could have did better, whether it's positioning, whether it's other moves you could make. This game has a really nice rubber banding effect, and it's not even too bad of one. It's one that actually makes you think about, should I attack somebody, shouldn't I? Where, sometimes they daze your model, and then you get back up and you freaking smash them with your power and stuff. So maybe it was a bad idea, and this is why doing stuff that's a little more aggressive, I think sometimes really works out, depending on the scenarios and stuff, because you get power and you force them to waste activations, and that's a whole nother, more specific tactical stuff. But you have, when I lose, and even when I win, I have a lot of trouble going to bed afterwards, because I'm thinking about the game, and I'm some people like to record their games or take screenshots. I can remember pretty well what's happening and be like, man, I should have placed here because he wouldn't have been able to do this or that. Little things, even if you win. and that's tough. But that's I mean that's part of getting better. I mean everything from here on out, pretty much from a tactical standpoint, revolves around practicing and actually putting it into effect and learning from it. And if you can't do that and use some of these specific tools to get better, whether it's finding good opponents or just playing a lot in the beginning or doing stuff on your own or finding opponents that play matches that you want to practice against, like if you don't do any of that stuff and you're just sitting there playing once a month, then you're dead in the water before you even want to get better. And that's okay if that's what you want to do. I'm not saying that, but if you're listening to these videos being like, how do I really get to the top and get better? Listen, it starts with some of this stuff, and it starts with being honest with yourself about what you did wrong and not thinking about dice and priority rolls and crisis pools. Like, it's important, but that's life. Like, that just happens. See if you can win in the moment. Thanks for listening.